Hi, everybody. I'm happy to present to you today my newest acquisition. It is the blackbox from 1010music. It's an amazing little workstation. You could call it a sampler or a DAW or a synthesizer. It is not bigger than this oscillator. I would call it the MPC Baby Live. Although it's much more, it has granular. It's having 3 stereo outputs. It's having the opportunity to power it completely with a power bank via USB. And the greatest thing, it works with SD mini cards, meaning you can have huge sample libraries with you. So watch out, and I show you all the features. So let's get into the black box. First of all, it's a really sturdy construction. It's full metal, so it is, I think, a perfect tool for the road also. It's having this touch screen. With this touch screen, you activate these pads when you loaded something on it. And you have 4 rotary encoders, 2 buttons here, and some buttons here to go into the different menus for the pad settings, for the keys when you play it like a keyboard. For the sequences, you have, of course, a sequencer on board, and you have separate sequences which you can all trigger then and record. In the song mode, you have an effects section with various effects. At the moment, it's delay and reverb on effects 1 and 2. And you have a mix section where you can have the volume for each pad, also as the panning for the pad. And of course, you can also mute when you press the back button. You can mute certain parts. You have then the file structure, your presets, loading and saving, and finally a tool section with all the main settings. So, but let's first look into the whole design of this device. It's having 3 stereo outputs, and I can separately send various pads into different stereo outs. I can also use it for recorded CV audio to control other modular gears outside. I have a phone output, and I have a stereo mini jack input for sampling. I have on TRS MIDI, my MIDI in and MIDI out. Really important, check with your other devices if it's working. There comes a cable with, but it doesn't mean automatically that it's working. For certain devices you need adapters because there's different polarities. There is a really cheap one from Retro Kits which saves you really. For example, if you want to work with a OP set, you definitely need this to switch, because without it will not work with the module of the OPZ and some other devices. Then you have a clock in and out. You have a USB device, meaning you can connect all kind of MIDI keyboards like this, for example, automatically to play the black box. And also you have for the power USB-A. Further with the connectivity, you have in the front the connector for the mini SD card. And what's interesting about the sampler, normally sampler have like a fixed rate of RAM inside, so you have to load then into the RAM from your USD devices. In this case, it is the device itself which loads, just directly streams the audio data from the mini SD card, which means you will never face any troubles with perhaps too long samples, because it's automatically streaming. And you're able to stream 16 samples, stereo samples at the same time. The device is at the moment mainly recording on 48 kilohertz. Anyhow, it's 16-bit samples, and it's automatically streamed from the SD card, mini SD card, which means that you can have really huge loads of sample libraries with you. Because on a standard mini SD today, you get like a 256 gigabyte for around $80. So that's a great value you get. Okay, let's have a look into the whole device. Of course, you have down here the play, the stop, and the record button for all the functions, from recording a sample up to recording MIDI notes, up to recording sequencer settings. So this is generally operating all the different possibilities to record. Now let's look from left to the right onto the buttons. First of all, the pads. You have here the 16 pads, and you have here a velocity. So you can then like enter the velocity, how loud you want to play the pad. The next is the keys button, where you can just play then the pad which you selected first on the keyboard. You can transpose it. The next is the sequencer button, where you can record various sequences and you can activate them or switch them off. For example, right now all are switched off. Actually, not all. So now they are all switched off. So when it's framed, it is activated. So I activate now a few, like this, this and that, and perhaps this, and then they should instantly run. We go then deeper into the sequencer later. Then you have a song mode. When you activate it and you go on recording, you can record like the different settings of your sequences. On effects, as I said before, you can define how much effect you want to put onto a pad. You have the FX1, which is basically the delay. You have several settings for it. And on the FX2, you have a reverb, which you can then add. So you first of all activate your pad, and then you can see how much you send it into the effects by this. The next is the mix button. When you press back, you select them all. You can decide which one you switch spontaneously off. And otherwise you can set up like the volume and the panning for it with the left encoder, the volume, and with the left down encoder the panning. Here you load with the preset, you load the file. You can then load one of your presets. The preset contains always all the samples and the sequence what you recorded with it. So let's load one. Here, for example, standard 808 kit, or there's a lot of samples contained in the mini SD card which is delivered with the device. But of course you will instantly load your own stuff onto the device. And then you have finally the settings, the general settings, as there is the main setting for brightness of the display, the headphone level. If you want to have a compressor, makes sense to use it, because sometimes when you add a lot of loops, and if there's running like 16 loops, it might happen that your device is distorting. On the record page you have all the settings, if you want to keep them global or separately for each pad, the metronome setting, all this. And also, of course, if you record while playing. And MIDI in, MIDI out, you define, of course, own channels for the MIDI pads, which contain, for example, drums or loops, which you just toggle or trigger, and MIDI keys for playing like MIDI notes. Of course, it's also having program change. All this you can set here. And you can switch through the different various menus with the info button. This works actually for all the different settings. So first of all, we look now into how is sampling working. So we just do a sampling, and I suggest now we just do a new setting and load it. So it's now empty. First of all, we now start to sample something. We press the pad on which we want to sample, press the info button, we're instantly on the record setting. Here we can decide left, right sampling, left or right, or resample, for example, an arrangement which is running. We can also decide for the pad here on which output we want to send our sample. So we can use stereo samples, out 1, out 2, out 3, or we can send it to monoplaces. We can decide then if we want to work with a threshold for sampling, or if we want to work with a record quantization, meaning that it starts to automatically sample from a certain point, in this case, for example, after a 16th note or after a full bar. So, but we use threshold. We can decide how long the sample is. It could be custom length, meaning as long as you want to sample, or you can decide on amount of bars up to 128 bars. And we sample now, I would say something like 8 bars. We have then here the setting, the gain setting. We have, of course, we need to connect something here on our input with the record monitor, which I always keep on, because then the black box is also giving you one extra mixing channel where you can connect some other device, for example a pocket operator, whatever you carry with you, which you want to play live with the black box together. So it's like an extra channel, but of course you can also put it in auto mode, that it's or completely off when you work in a bigger mixing solution and you have a separate monitoring. With the load function, of course, you can then load separate samples, or you can also save samples. But now we start to sample something. I get like a little synthesizer, which is right now connected. I switch it on. It's a Volca modular. And of course, I need now to set up my gain correctly. So we just start to sample and gives us a click. Sample is already in place. And that's it with this sample. And I would also suggest we sample another, sorry for the hum, like a drum loop. From a pocket operator. And first of all, we decide a tempo. We go into the song window, pressing stop here. Having a tempo, we use, I would suggest let's have a 80 BPM. So we set it here on 80 BPM. I now work with a fixed BPM because I want to then later time stretch this loop in correct length. So let's a little bit loud, but anyway, next sample, we press this pad and we sample, in this case, only 1 bar and put it more silent. And go to record. And here is our sample. So now let's look into the samples. This is, for example, right now a sample which is automatically triggered. We look into the functions, how we can interpretate the sample which is on our device. Let's work first with this drum loop here. When we go into info, we first of all see like a visual representation of our waveform, and we can of course zoom into it and scroll around, which also makes it for us more easy to set start point and end point for the sample. So, but we have it now to the maximum length. So we can always trigger it from here to have a listen how it sounds. When we press next time the info button, we go through all the menus, and here we have now more sub-menus. First of all, the main menu. Here we can decide, of course, the level for the sample, the pitch for the sample. And we have a filter, which is when I turn it to the left, a low pass, and to right, a high pass filter. Then we have the launch mode for the sample. Launch mode means the way how we interpret the sample. For example, if we want to have it on a keyboard, then we use, of course, a gate mode. If we want to just trigger a sample, for example, like a drum sample, then we use trigger. And if we have whole loops which should just run in the sequence, we use the toggle button. Each time we then press the loop, it runs until we press it again to switch it off with the next round. And then we have a classical envelope, attack, sustain, decay, release. Then we have the settings. Do we want to loop it forward, backward, or bidirectional? It's not really a good sample right now, but whatever, reverse, use, and goes forward again and backwards again. Then we can decide the root node, what makes sense, for example, for classical samples, which I want to tune to a scale. Then we have another representation, which we also have on the visual one for the start and end point, the loop point for the sample, and finally the MIDI settings for the sample. This is when we interpret the sample mainly as a just simple sample. So with this representation, we can always decide on which sample we want to work or which clip we want to work. So we have here our clip, and the good thing about the clip is, and the main difference to the clip to the normal sample is that the clip is time stretched. So basically we can now change the tempo. I just start this sample. And now when I change the tempo of the song, it's time stretching automatically my clip into the right timing. And not only classical time stretching, I also can change now the tune of it, and it still stays in time. Okay, so much about this. We now select again our drum sample and use another mode, which is the slicer mode. With the slicer, I can put all these samples from this loop into separate samples, and therefore I can decide how I want to slice it. There is various ways. I can scan. Scan means I put a threshold, and always when the level goes over this threshold, it makes a cut, and then it goes till the next point where is a level which comes over it. So this helps a lot, for example, having separate samples and you want to use them separately, for example these drum sounds, or you use the grid mode and you cut it into slices, and then you have little slices which you can play how you want on the keyboard. However you do it, the good thing is you can decide here the number of slices, and then you can play them over the keyboard. You have now your split points, and you can, of course, we have it now in trigger mode. I put them into gate mode and go to the keyboard, and now you can see I have them all separate. This also tells you can have much more samples on one pad. Actually, you have 16 channels, and you have for each pad the amount of keys you want to address, and the amount of slices you put you get from your sample. For example, if you go to grid, you can go up to, you see, 128 slices, meaning you can put on each pad 128 samples and then address them separately with a MIDI note you play from your keyboard, which gives you much more than just only 16 samples. Of course, you can join them together, those which you address here, and then you join them if you like to have less of them, or you can split manually by just going into the sample, for example, putting here a split point, and it comes automatically. This also gives you an opportunity like to cut out parts when you want, because at the moment you have not a lot of functions to copy and paste samples. But this gives you the opportunity, for example, if you don't want to use a certain part of the sample, then you just can put it into slices and you just play those slices which you want to hear, or you make bigger bunches or bigger cuts which you want to play from the whole sample and leave the other stuff away. And now we see the next function, it's the granular. So granular synthesis is a wonderful feature of this device, and as a standalone device I only at the moment know a similar one, which is the GR1 from Tasty Chips, which is having granular, but now also the blackbox got it. So first of all, when you go into granular mode, we have then to decide how many grains we want to use and where we start, the position of the start. Let's have it a bit later. And then using amount of grains we take. You have to be careful with that because it eats a lot of system resources, and the more grains you take, the harder it gets, and it could come to a point, especially when you have many grains on several pads, that the black box starts then to create dropouts, because it has constantly to read from the SD card for this, and this is a lot of processing power. Then you decide a speed, how fast you scan through the sample, and a spread, so how much are the different samples taken out around the area of the point where you're sampling from. And as you see, you can hear now. We go a little bit further into the sample. Start point a little bit later. From this point. Of course, you also have here a filter, and of course also a ADSR to make it more smooth. Giving it a little bit slower running. On this side, on the MISC, you can decide then in which direction you want to go in the sample. You can do it bidirectional, then it's scanning forward and backward through the sample. You can also put here a reverse, and of course a root node. Then you can decide your position, the start point, and then the looping point for your grain. Within this loop, it's then, for example, when you put it bidirectional, it's running in between these borders, so you can start from a separate point and then go into this loop mode. Then you have some settings. Where you can modulate the various parts of the granular. For example, if you want to modulate with a velocity or pitch wheel or something, you can here press these black fields for start point, for the length, and so on. And you have also on the main page possibility to put velocity onto the level of the sample and also modulate the pitch. So much about the basic settings for the sampling. Next, we watch how we work with sequences. I load a sequence here if there is. So let's see here. So we start first and I show you how it's now working. So now we have a few sounds running. A sequence. I activate it by pressing it. And now for the next 8 bars comes in this output. Those on again, this off. Now I show you how it's working to record a sequence. I switch this off and record this newly. It's on this pad. So, and we start to record. First of all, of course, I have to decide how long it is. So I press again the info, and now I can decide what is basically my step length. So for example, if I say, yeah, my line is really having no 16th note, so I can put it on 8th note. And then putting the step count. Right now I use 16th notes and put it up to 128 steps. And we go into record mode. It's activated. And I go into my keyboard. It's recorded. If I want to correct something on my sequence, it's quite easy. I go back into the overlook here and I press the info, and now I can also zoom and scroll here within my grid editor. In this case it's a classical keys editor. To select a note, I just select it with the upper encoder. When it's purple, I can edit it in length and in position. And of course I can also put notes in as much as I want. When I go into the pad mode, then I just see the pads which are pressed. So I can record at the same time pads and MIDI notes. Of course, the functionality for the editing is at the moment not so huge, meaning it makes sense to keep an order by having for each line what you sequence, our own sequence. Then when you want to record these sequences in an order for a song, you go into the song mode. So clear. So, and you can record now in the song mode your sequence setting. Section 2, because each is only 8 bars long in the default setting. We make another change. So now we have recorded a song mode, and we can perform it here from the song editor and have our section. We can copy and paste them however we need them. Finally, we have here another setting. Of course, the bars. Now we had only 8 bars each section, so you can also make them longer. And you can put here a swing function if you want. And of course the tempo, and as you know, as everything becomes time stretched, it is no problem to change the tempo. So finally, you save and store from this menu, the preset menu. You can decide a new one, and of course you have all the file structure here to delete, rename, save, and so on. I really recommend that you start to have fast some kind of order of your sounds, because you can also like store your separate samples, and then at the end you have thousands of samples and you have no clue where what belongs. So here is already some kind of bad order. You can navigate here through the various sections and menus. If you want to manage your files, of course you can also put the SD card in your computer and copy and paste there. So much about the blackbox. I think it's an amazing device, a lot of value for the money. And of course, if you're one of these mobile musicians who are just constantly on the run and don't want to have a whole studio with them, this is the tool for you. This in combination with some other device is wonderful. You can sample. For example, me, I have on tour my blackbox and my OPC, and that's it. Of course, I have for some older songs which are arranged on my Akai MPC, a big Akai MPC with me, but I try really to strip everything down and to be in the future just on tour with these two devices, the OPC and the blackbox. You don't need more, and if you need, then try to keep it still small with some other mobile devices. So much about this tutorial. I hope you liked it. If you liked it, just give me a like button. If you disliked it, You can also put comments down there. And of course, check out my channel. There's many other tutorials for various devices, and it's becoming more and more. Next time I'm gonna check the Soma devices, because I got the Lyra 8 and the Soma pipe. So interesting instrument. So much about this. Have a nice day, and thank you for watching.